Unbound, free, unshackled by limits. That is what the name stands for. With a new art style and story beats, Unbound seek to differentiate itself from the 3 other games in its era. It's a great game, or is it? Unbound strays away from that of a traditional art style for a game of this archetype, in favor of something much more innovative. Yes, I'm talking about these ever so controversial anime effects. Though cool at first glance, this visual flair does not exist to simply distract the player from the action at hand. Rather, its purpose is to emphasize the coolness of it. Cartoon smoke arises from tires as drifts are made. Light trails emanate from taillights when driving above 100 miles an hour. Wings draw themselves on the side of the car when catching airtime. The car looks mischievous when crashing a cop car, giving me that little smile. Though most apparent are the effects bundled with the new burst nitrous system. Sparks fly out when gaining it, and the camera is forcefully hurled back when used. The full 3-bar charge doesn't even make you go that much faster, but it doesn't matter, because you feel like you're driving at the speed of light, and going fast is fun. Cel-shaded characters are icing on the cake. While by no means an original concept in the world of gaming, they provide an excellent contrast to the game's realistically rendered cars, the same style that the aforementioned anime effects seek to achieve. Yet this visual style and aesthetic does not pertain strictly to the gameplay. The rest of Unbound is bursting to the seams with character and style. The logo exploding with energy and style in the start screen, rap beats playing in free roam that ramp up in pursuits. Race and cop icons on the map include doodles. The same map which displays photos of Yaz and Rydell from before the events of the game on the side. Scattered around its border are random receipts and objects from the game's world. These changes might sound minor, but they bring so much character and charm to a genre that hasn't seen anything remotely close to it in years. These effects never come off as needlessly shoehorned in either. Unbound's open world is gray and dreary for a reason. It was crafted this way to make this art style appear more exuberant and distinct. This consolidation of effects and style differentiate Unbound from all of its contemporaries of this genre and scale. No other modern AAA racing game will touch something this divergent with a 10-foot barge pole. Their implementation encroaches on nothing and makes your Need For Speed burn ever so brighter. Car handling has undergone a considerable improvement in Unbound. For the longest time, Need For Speed games took the word arcade to the fullest extent of the word. Cars felt incredibly stable and were next to impossible to spin out. While fun, it was a safe kind of fun. There was rarely, if ever, a danger of losing control. Unbound seek to change this, making cars feel less safe with its revamped handling model. Your actions now have a significantly higher level of weight to them. You can no longer blast through turns with reckless abandon. Oversteering and as a result spinning out is now a genuine concern. You're driving supercars, climbing the speedometer in increments of hundreds. Did you think that would be comfortable? Pushing the analog stick too far to the left or to the right causes cars to spin out of control, and thus comes with a reason to drive carefully. Traveling at 200 miles per hour entails a visceral sense of dread to the player, something absent in games of this genre since, as far as I can recall, 2011's shift to Unleashed. It's still nowhere near as dramatic as that game, but the sensation of being at the edge of control is present. The increased field of view, combined with the fact that a simple mistake could cost you the entire race, makes this ever so thrilling. Grip turns are much improved. For far too long, they were not practically usable. You needed to be a good driver, know when to brake and how to take corners properly. Why would you want to do that when you can cheese through every corner with the drift mechanic? Well, there was no answer. Even I didn't do it. In Unbound, however, it's given a use, even encouraged. Performing them successfully now awards burst nitrous, giving the player a short burst of speed to catch up with everyone else. My brother, Dr. Grip Turns, was happy about it. But what is burst nitrous? Earned by doing near misses, drafts, drifts, grip turns, and the like, it encourages risky driving and rewards you with a short explosion of energy. It also encourages you to take risky maneuvers to fill it. The catch, however, is that this nitrous is only available for a brief fleeting moment. If you wait too long, it expires and is no longer usable. This results in a constant debate as to whether or not you want to pass someone or fall back under the premise that it's not worth the risk of crashing into something. I'm using the word debate in a positive light here. It's fun and adds an entirely new layer of depth to a mechanic that has lay stagnant for many years. So the handling model is good, but what about the cars which operate by it? Unbound has a myriad of cars ranging from mighty SUVs to nimble exotics, yet it doesn't take a genius to realize that it's a mere copy of its predecessor. Putting these two side by side, newer cars are nowhere near as prevalent as one might expect them to be. For a game released in the 2020s, it sure does hesitate to include cars from its era. Unbound falls into the trap of not including many new models. Whether this is due to manufacturers growing stingier of licensing their cars to games about illegal street racing, or EA simply not wanting to spend the money, or something else entirely, I can't say for sure. But for fans of Heat, it is a major letdown. 13 new cars at launch, 2 being removed from Heat, are simply too few, and certainly too far between for an entirely new game. Need for Speed takes a customization-focused approach, I understand, but the novelty of those 13 cars fades quickly and results in Unbound's list feeling a bit too familiar to Heat. There is never an incentive, a burning desire in your heart to drive one of the new cars, given how rare they are. Compounding onto this are Unbound's arbitrary car unlock restrictions. Certain cars, most of which are copied from Heat mind you, are locked behind meaningless challenges. Awarding special designs or variants of these cars would be acceptable, but locking base models comes off as a silly way to force completion, not encourage it. Sentencing players to the punishment of smashing each and every billboard is a tedious and long process, and a worthless one at that. These restrictions exist for the sake of existing, not for the sake of adding any value to gameplay. But we have yet to discuss Unbound's map. And what a map it is. Nighttime, daytime, and overcast days look fantastic. Water droplets realistically accumulate on cars the way you've come to expect. These race intro cutscenes are the developers showing off. You don't have to inspect every frame to see the improvement off of the 8th generation consoles. Shader quality is much improved. Reflections playfully bounce off of cars in the environment. Buildings are meticulously detailed. Shadows realistically form around objects. And skyboxes are as real as skyboxes can be. Just look at that horizon. Yet it's not just a graphical upscale. For the first time in a Need for Speed game, people are finally visible in the world. They walk, talk, build stuff, and do whatever people do. Their presence breathes life into Lakeshore and makes Heat cities look abandoned in comparison. People live here, and it's obvious. But what about beyond the mom look it's real factor? I find that maps and racing games are easy to overlook, and Lakeshore sure was overlooked. While nowhere close to previous games in theme variety, Lakeshore is incredibly varied in structure. It's got everything you need: highways, tightly knit city roads, bridges, collapsing bridges even. Your surroundings constantly change. Houses reside in suburban areas, parking garages are found near public spaces, narrow roads wind over mountainous terrain while tunnels go under them. The Ferris wheel is a sight to behold, and none of this is taking into account the Porsche test track, which, by the way, is not the only racetrack in the game. I could go on. Criterion did go on. Out of all the feelings I got driving around this map, Deja Vu was never one of them. But don't forget that this is a racing game map, and it sure has that Criterion DNA rooted into it. Stadiums and columns are visible, yet don't exist as mere set pieces. They're ramps for you to jump off of, drive on, and smash things with. One racetrack is shaped like an oval and has a huge ramp for you to catapult your cars with. Yes, it is disappointing that the roads obviously intended for drifting can't be drifted on properly thanks to this game's physics, and it is a bit jarring watching certain destructibles disappear without any animations. But Lakeshore is a playground for racers, and a hugely entertaining one at that. But what about the street scene which resides within it? Well, luckily for Unbound, it's also seen a dramatic improvement in this regard, namely character rivals. They're great. A problem that previous entries had was that nothing felt personal. Sure, you're in a heated competition, but an impersonal one. At the end of the day, you're racing against an AI that's simply doing its job. It doesn't have anything against you, and so you don't have anything against it. That rivalry, that antagonism, that hatred for a specific enemy or enemy type was rarely fostered. Unbound seek to change this. You're up against real people. Well, as real as lines of code being run by the game's engine can be, but that doesn't matter. This personification of real people, names, identities, and customized cars all make you want to beat them in a way that mere position numbers and randomly generated names simply cannot. It's personal and immersive. These characters comment when you hit them, when they pass you, and sometimes even give you vague threats. They'll brag about being in a winning position and lament about being in a bad one. That rivalry is nurtured. You both know who's in the lead and who's in the dust, and that makes you push yourself well past your limits just to wipe that smile off of your opponent's faces. It's an amazing feeling betting with them and taking their money. But that's just one side of the coin, and sadly, only one is favorable. Lakeshore is a city home to some of the most exuberant street racing on the planet. Well, at least that's what EA would want you to think. That intro cutscene with your starter car crashing into the screen, people talking, waiting by the sidelines, the police intruding on a meetup is not upheld by the rest of the game. Because when you head to a meetup, it never comes off that way. It's nowhere near as alive. Misleading? No, but it is disappointing. Let's talk characters. While great in races, their largest issue is that their quantity is severely limited. There's like 15 of them in all of Lakeshore. Sure, they're detailed, but 15 in this entire city? Then who's causing that street racing problem that the mayoral candidates keep prattling on about? I might not be the sharpest tool in the shed at times, but even I can tell that sounds like something that more than 15 people would have to do to garner a statewide level of attention. What compiles onto this and makes this street scene, or lack thereof, come off as even duller is the absence of any fans. They exist, sure, yet nobody appears to be making side bets, cheering on as races begin, or showing off their own cars. Heat, while not perfect, exemplified this masterfully, with fans posing for pictures in front of your car as the race began, and watching in awe as the competition blew past the starting line. Meanwhile, in Unbound, it's barren. It's empty. The street scene feels artificial more than it does a group of young racers hanging out with their cars, and it hurts the vibe more than anything. A group this small is akin to a singular team more than it is an entire underground culture. But I haven't even brought up the game's crowning fault in this regard. Nobody is driving around. Lakeshore feels abandoned. It's a playground, sure, and a live-looking one definitely, but it isn't alive with street racing. Part of what made me admire the Crew Motorfest in spite of its laundry list of issues was its world. How Hawaii felt alive. How watching those cars race independent of my participation in it made the game feel like it had a beating heart. That festival will live on without my presence, yet Unbound street racing scene never shows itself in its open world. I bring up the mayoral argument again. Throughout Unbound, it's constantly told to you that street racing is a rapidly growing problem in Lakeshore, and that the police are doing everything they can to put a stop to it. The game does nothing to convince you of this. No street racer aside from yourself is ever seen driving around outside of a race. No racers are visible mid-pursuit with the police. No races are visible apart from the ones you take part in. Nobody attends car meets or events. Heck man, nobody even drives into the meetups like they do in the intro. Heat's night races with every racer quickly scurrying off in their own direction after crossing the finish line were significantly more immersive than Unbound's end screen, with your rivals simply despawning thereafter. Lakeshore is empty and barren at a time when it needed to be alive more than any other in the franchise. While we're on the topic of Heat, however, something that it did well was its police system. Does Unbound have a good one? Let's take a look at what it does well first. It's been said before, but the new enemy variety, different cop cars deployed at increasingly high heat levels, is much appreciated. It encourages players to use strategy to weave their way out of chases in interesting ways, as opposed to simply gunning it and hoping for the best. Chargers are your basic enemy. They're weak all around and aren't as fast. It's fine for cars that patrol the streets. Explorers are strong but slow. They aren't as nimble as you, but they can deal a lot of damage. Corvettes, on the other hand, are fast but weak. They'll easily keep up with any supercar, but can just as easily be taken out with evasive maneuvers, or by going off-road where they suffer a loss in control. Undercover Camaros are where things get spiced up. They aren't visible on the minimap and can summon roadblocks and spike strips. F-150s are deployed at the highest heat level. They're strong, quick off-road, and deal lots of damage. They don't have too many weaknesses, but that's passable for the enemy type that spawns at the highest heat level because they're meant to be a challenge. And then there's their faults, the main issue being that they are easy. Like, way too easy. Any small hit or scrape with them at even the most modest of speeds renders them immobilized. In addition, they often hesitate to make any aggressive maneuvers. The aforementioned Corvettes exhibit a tendency to simply drive next to you, as opposed to taking any aggressive maneuvers. The other police cars never try to slam into you or box you in the few times you'll end up in a precarious situation, which entirely excises the tension found within these chases. Evading their regular moves even are a trivial task. Just steer in a general direction away from them and you're golden. They might even wreck themselves too. This results in the police hardly having any presence within races. In the older games, this would be called a hot pursuit. In Unbound, I call it a cold pursuit. If the race does attract police attention, the cops are so slow that you won't even realize that they're chasing you until that dreaded "cop chase remaining" text appears on your screen after you finish it. Because the police are so easy to evade and crash out, escaping them becomes comically easy. Well, that's what I would say if it weren't for the police helicopters that appear after heat level 4. I'll speak about this game's risk and reward in a bit, but know that heat levels increase at a rather fast pace. Basically, after 3 races at night, you'll be at heat level 4 or 5, and chased by those helicopters. Because the cop cars are so easy to wreck, you'll often end up destroying all of them and remain in a pursuit consisting of 1 or 2 helicopters, which which do nothing to stop you but will remain hot on your trail until you park your car and hide. If you're not found by the helicopter, however, you will be caught by one of the million cop cars that patrol the streets after you escape the chase. Out of all the words that came to my mind while trying to sneak my way past the legion of cop cars on every single road, stealth mission was the one that I thought of most. That's not a good sign. The issue doesn't lie within escaping the cops. It's that escaping them is easy, but staying hidden is difficult. It results in a game where you will constantly be forced into boring police chases that last far longer than is tolerable. In Rivals and Heat, you were terrified of getting in a police chase because they were dangerous. In Unbound, you're scared of wasting another 5 minutes of your life pointlessly running away from them. Risk and reward, as a result, has also undergone a considerable downgrade from Heat. But to properly discuss where Unbound falters, we need to take a brief look at Heat. Calm and benign police during the day that turn rogue and aggressive at night. Make money during the day, but the real party starts when the sun goes down. Because rep was tied to player progression and by extension cars and upgrades, you were incentivized to earn as much as possible. At night, your heat level is at scale with your rep multiplier, which is increased by doing more races. Heat level 5 can earn you tons of it, with the catch being its high police response. If you choked and got busted before making it to a safe house, you lost all of that rep. Your hard work was gone. In Unbound, this has been substantially trivialized. Firstly, the time of day doesn't make a difference in police aggression. The LSPD chases you with the same ferocity at night as they do during the day. Secondly, heat levels rise too quickly. After 3 or so events, you'll be at heat level 5. The game acts like it'll be a challenge, but it isn't. It's tedious avoiding the police, sure, but after a few minutes, you'll drive to the next race. That tension, that questioning of whether or not your car and your nerve can tolerate another race was what made Heat so captivating. Do you risk it all in the hopes of earning more, or do you end your run now while you're ahead? Because that tension is eliminated, so is the risk, meaning that instead of risk and reward, it's just reward. The game is broken. Why shouldn't you complete every race available to you? You do want money, right? You never run away to a hideout out of fear of losing all your money in Unbound. You keep going because the chances of you losing any of it are nigh impossible. Impossible if you quit the game right before getting busted. As an added bonus, you're conveniently spawned in front of a repair shop. Heat got an A. Unbound didn't read the directions. Unbound has a revenge story. You know this because your car was stolen and because your goal is to get it back. Is it a good story? Yes. Great? No. But for a game with this much emphasis on its story, anything less than great is below my expectations. Unbound has a tone problem. Its plot is about taking your car back from Yaz. Its theme is anger and vengeance. You're angry at Yaz. Completely unrelated, but next to everyone also makes corny jokes every time they open their mouths. Trying to focus on your goal of winning the grand is next to impossible, with Tess constantly talking your ear off about food and Rydell forgetting to say Need For Speed. It wants you to be angry, but it also wants you to laugh at every dialogue line. Of course, none of this is to say that Unbound's story is bad, because it's not by a long shot. When you witness Rydell watch all of his cars race away from his garage in a single fell swoop, betrayed by someone he raised, you feel genuinely sorry for him. He did nothing wrong but lost not only his cars, but also part of his family, and so did you. He didn't deserve this, and that makes you upset. You want to take down Yaz for what she did, possibly more so than you want your old car back. This game's heartfelt ending will genuinely make an impact on you. Yaz finally growing up and understanding her mistake, finding it in her to say sorry, and finally reuniting with her family gives a cozy feeling never before seen in the racing genre. My problem isn't that this game's story is bad or poorly written, it's that it's pointless. Every time you leave the garage, you're reminded that this game is about revenge. It's hammered into your head through phone calls and garage dialogue. It's the entire point of the game. It's why you turn to street racing in the first place. You're on a mission to win your old car back from Yaz, which is why I was all the more confused when I saw that the main character ends up forgiving Yaz. No, really, she decides to reconcile with you in, I kid you not, the last 75% of the game. And at the end, she does. She becomes your friend as quickly as she became your enemy. And why did she become our enemy in the first place? Because she was scared of how Rydell would act when the cars were stolen by people she didn't know. Come on! Alec was also hinted to be an ominous puppet master, supposedly pulling the strings of the street racing scene from behind closed curtains, yet never makes any appearances in the game, and is only casually mentioned in conversations. In the end, he was the one to blame for Yaz's betrayal. For all intents and purposes, he's the true antagonist of Unbound, yet he never shows up on screen for his own downfall. But hey, at least we get to meet ASAP Rocky. You know, the guy on the cover, who also appears for a grand total of 2 missions. Sorry, 3 if you count his voice lines in the takeover events. One of which is a duel in which he doesn't say anything, the other an interview that was horribly cut into the game. The conversation awkwardly shifts to ASAP Rocky's motivations and what drives him. His dialogue, while interesting, fails in its attempt to bring anything relevant to the game's theme. He doesn't talk about Lakeshore's street racing scene or give your character any advice on how to deal with Yaz's apology. He's just being interviewed, and then he never talks to your character again. I mean, he does appear in the races after this encounter, and he does have a line saying that you have cheat codes, but that's about all he has to do with this game. ASAP Rocky's performance comes across more as a cameo than it does a collaboration. Unbound is one of, if not the longest game in the franchise, and does very little to justify its runtime. The game follows a day and night system. To beat Yaz, you're required to prepare your garage in order to compete in the weekly qualifier. This is where the week system comes in. Go through 6 days worth of racing in both day and night to earn enough money to afford the qualifier's buy-in and upgrades for your car. This system is problematic for a plethora of reasons. Firstly, it's repetitive, but not in the way you might think. Sure, doing races back to back for hours on end might sound grating, but it's the lack of event variety that makes this truly irritating. It's limited, agonizingly so. You'll end up noticing it in the first week of the game, and by the second, it'll become jarring. Given how little Unbound does in the way of presenting its risk factor, you will play through every event and it will grow annoying. Headliner, Big City Life, the OG, they will all become intimately familiar to you, and this level of repetition will not feel intentional. The game feels like it's trying to hide its shallow pool of events by relegating them to separate race types. Corner Kings, speed races, street races. They do very little to feel different enough to justify an entirely different event category. Delivery missions and takeovers are fun and great ways to deviate from the norm, but they aren't fun enough to divert your attention from the fact that there aren't that many races. You will learn to speedrun Unbound, not organically live in its street scene, and by the time you roll credits, you'll be burnt out of its shallow gameplay variety. Secondly, it's pointless. For each qualifier, you're required to earn enough cash in order to afford this week's qualifier's buy-in. The problem with this system is that you'll have both a heavily upgraded car and all the money you need by the end of the second day of the week, which makes the rest of that week completely pointless and boring. You can't just skip to the qualifier, you're forced to do at least a single race each day before advancing to the next. And so, you race, and you will grow to hate it. Of course, it would be impossible to wrap up this review on Unbound without at least taking a glance at its online mode, which from the perspective of an outsider looking in, seems to be getting significantly better. A wealth of new cars, new game modes, and new ways to shake up the monotony. And credit where credit is due, it's fun. It makes many great strides in breaking up the single player's monotony. Drift and drag events, I like them. I might be a little biased here given that my username is literally Dr. Powerslide, but drift events are very much enjoyable. It's an almost meditative experience trying to get your car to perfectly align with the track's curvature for maximum point gain. The new Drift Pro tires make this ever so enjoyable. They're extremely low grip, forcing you to optimally angle your drift. Drag events are a callback to Underground, with you being challenged to switch lanes alongside shifting. Overall, Unbound Online is fun. A lot of it even. I enjoyed it, and so will you. The modes are well crafted and will genuinely feel like they were made by people passionate about the game. However, and I do not use that word lightly, Lakeshore Online comes with many catches. Close to every single car from the single player is now locked behind random, seemingly unrelated challenges. You cannot purchase them without completing its arbitrary set of tasks. All of the new content is also exclusive to the online mode. It doesn't matter how far you got in the story mode, the only way to access this new content is through an entirely different game mode, which in of itself is an asinine decision, and it's understandable why people would not want to switch to a completely different mode to enjoy the new content. But that's not the only catch. If you want to drive Unbound's new cars like the S650 Mustang and M3 G81 Touring, you are required to trudge through yet another battle pass, and not a free one at that. $10 USD is what is required to buy its premium version. Players are not only required to spend that money to be eligible to earn new content, but are also forced to grind endlessly for it. And once you earn the car, you are then required to grind even more if you want access to all of its body kits. This method of monetization is absurd, and the community is right to question it. Fear not, however, for if you missed a volume, you can buy access to the previous one's content for another hefty $10. $10 USD for some cosmetics and a few body kits. Maybe a car if you're lucky. That's not even absurd anymore, it's exorbitant. And while we're in the store page, we find quite possibly the worst deal I've seen throughout my entire gaming history. $15 USD for, get this, a cosmetic pack. All three of these packs total out at $45. What do they do, cure cancer? Content from previous games has also been cut out in order to be implemented later on as DLC. The Audi R8 and S5 were not present at launch due to licensing problems, but were added later on as those rights were acquired. Rather than quietly adding them into the game, EA inexplicably decided to sell them as DLC. $3 USD is what they deem an acceptable price for cars that were present in Heat, one of which was in Payback from 2017. It's so cartoonishly overpriced that it makes literally anything else look like a steal. The game modes and gameplay variety are fun, and will keep you entertained for a considerable amount of time, but the way it's monetized is beyond egregious. It's flat out silly to the fullest extent of the word. I enjoyed this mode, and you probably will too, but I can't in good conscience recommend that anyone buy these microtransactions. I didn't hate Need For Speed Unbound. I might criticize it, but this game did many things fantastically. Unbound is genuinely one of the best Need For Speeds of the modern era. Its core racing experience arguably the most fun the franchise has ever been, though its flaws were what held it back from being the best. The absence of its street racing scene, the weakness of the cops, and the dull car list all hampered the joy Unbound had to offer of keeping you on guard for the duration of every race you found yourself in. It's a good time, just not a great one. Enjoy it, but don't forget its flaws, and don't you forget what it deserved to be. Thank you for watching. Wait, it hasn't been 2 years yet? Forget it, I'll write 1.5 in the title.